It is my great pleasure to introduce Sean Finn, who is standing in today for Stanley Garnett, our district attorney. Mr. Finn, could I please ask you what your title at the district attorney's office is?
Sure. I'm a chief trial deputy there. I'm also the official custodian of records there.
Okay. Chief trial attorney, is that what you
Chief
said?
trial deputy, yes.
Chief, how can you be a chief deputy? Okay, but I guess this is law. Law doesn't necessarily have to make sense.
It's a philosophical question.
How many deputies are there?
How many deputies are there? Total, we probably have about 35.
And you're the chief of them?
I'm one of a handful of chiefs. The way that the office is run, you have the elected district attorney at the top, and below that there are 2 assistant district attorneys. The next level is chief trial deputies, and I am one of 6, I believe, chief trial deputies.
Is there a chief of the chiefs?
Well, the assistants, I guess, would be the chief of the chiefs.
Okay.
Yeah, and we all have different areas that we focus on as far as managing, as well as taking some of the more high-profile cases.
Right.
Mr. Finn, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and let me just say at the outset that one thing that Stan told me early on when he asked me to come on his behalf was how much he's enjoyed coming to this group and speaking in the past. He found it to be a very welcoming crowd and very thoughtful as well, and so I'd just like to express my thanks for the invitation. The topic that I was given was, at its core, the concept of all of the WikiLeaks type information that's been out there and what we think about it. And it would be easy for me to say not that much, because that has to do with a federal situation, and we're all state. We deal only with state laws, we deal with state regulations. But it overlaps with a lot of what we do in relation to what we can say, what we can't say, open records, what is open, what isn't open. And I can tell you that it's always been the policy of this office and Stan's policy that we're doing the people's business, and the people have a right to know what it is we're doing on their behalf. So that is reflected in Colorado law. We have what's called the Colorado Open Records Act, or CORA. We also have the Colorado Criminal Justice Records Act. And both of those acts, at their core, say that what we do is public. What we do, people have a right to know about. But there are some big exceptions to that. For example, there are exceptions. One of the biggest exceptions that comes up is exceptions for ongoing investigations. When we're investigating a situation or an individual, we don't necessarily want those individuals to know that the investigation is ongoing. So if we get an open records request involving something that's still ongoing, we have to say no. Another exception to that has to do with the grand jury. We have a grand jury that operates in Boulder County, and all of their investigations similarly are secret, which causes, I think, some consternation sometimes, and people don't necessarily understand that. A couple of years ago, I was involved in litigation over whether or not our office would release the transcripts of, or not so much transcripts, but some information the grand jury had on the John Benet Ramsey murder investigation. You might have heard of it. And the office's position, and the position essentially that's in the statutes in Colorado, is we're put in a position where we have to either bring charges or shut up. And the reason for that is that if you're not bringing charges against someone, it's maybe not fair to reach out and say, we have an investigation into this person, and here's all the other stuff that we think might be involved, but we're not quite to the point where we're bringing charges. That's not fair to that individual, probably. So that's one of the reasons why we don't release those investigations. Once an investigation, once charges are filed, or in some cases a grand jury will release a report, then that becomes, we're taking official action, and that makes sense. But until then, not so much. Another thing that comes up is we often get asked to comment on ongoing investigations, to talk about the latest person who was arrested or charged with a crime. We as attorneys have ethical obligations. With regard to an ongoing case, we have rules that prohibit us from making statements that could taint a jury. So we can't come out and say, well, we've arrested this person and we think he's the worst person ever and he's done these horrible things, and once we get in front of a jury, we'll show you all those horrible things that he did. We can talk about anything that is public already. If there's an arrest affidavit that's been signed off on by a judge, we can talk about that. If something happened in court, we can talk about that. Anything that is already in the public sphere. But anything else, anything that we happen to think about a criminal case that's ongoing, anything that we have to, that we happen to know that's not public, we have to do our talking in court. And until it gets to that point, we're extremely limited, as we should be. But I can tell you we get open records requests, at least a few every week, with regard to different issues or different. We do our best to comply with those. How does that overlap with subjects like WikiLeaks? Well, the question that we end up asking ourselves is, what is legal and what is right to release? And if someone releases something that they're not supposed to, what's our position going to be? We've had those situations come up occasionally, not all that often. But for example, we have had situations where a grand juror who is subject to grand jury secrecy has spoken about a case that they weren't supposed to speak about. One of the reasons why the grand jurors are not supposed to speak outside of the grand jury is that they might go home and say, you know, I have this case involving this situation. And inevitably somebody else sitting around the table will say, I have strong feelings about those kinds of cases. Let me tell you about what they are. And we need to make sure that the grand jurors make any decisions that they make based on what happens in court and based on the evidence that's presented to them. Could a person who left and started talking out of school be prosecuted? They could. There are laws that keep that from happening. They're technically in contempt of court. We haven't taken strongly aggressive positions on that. In the case that I'm referring to, that grand jury case was terminated. We had to proceed on that case in a different way. It was annoying to the prosecution, but we didn't end up bringing charges against that person, although we did also not invite them back for any further sessions of the grand jury. Similarly, I can come back to the John Benet Ramsey investigation. We've had people who have spoken to the press. We haven't taken an aggressive position on that. We haven't brought charges against those people or anything like that. But that's not to say that it isn't important. I think the reasons behind the secrecy that's built in are important reasons. And I think that they're reasons that that we have to take seriously, because I don't think it's fair to release some of that information. I don't think it's necessarily the right thing to do. Questions about that or how we handle that stuff? Does anybody have any thoughts about any of that? Yeah.
Just for those who are new here, we ask that you raise your hand up. Sometimes we get 7 or 8 people stacked up to ask questions. So in terms of this, and then we're going to deal with you. Of you saying to this grand juror, you're not invited back. Does the prosecution get to make that decision unilaterally?
Yes. Grand juries are a little bit weird in that there is no judge in front of a grand jury. There is no defense attorney in front of the grand jury. The grand jury is an investigative body all on its own. And in fact, when we start an investigation, the first thing we do is we give the grand jurors a synopsis of what we believe we want to investigate, and we ask them if they're interested in investigating it. And if they're not, then we don't. That's up to them. But with regard to issues of propriety, of whether someone might have broken the rules of the grand jury, we have some options. And one of those options is to go to the judge and seek contempt proceedings. We could do that. Another option is simply to say that they're no longer on the grand jury and file a motion with the chief judge to dismiss them. Now, the judge did sign off on that and did ultimately have some say in that, but there's nobody that's right there. So initial decisions are made sometimes, and then a motion is filed with the court. The chief judge of our jurisdiction could have said, that's not a breach of the rules, and that person's not going to be dismissed. That didn't happen in this case.
Gentlemen, and please speak up.
What about the 10,000 pedophilia indictments since Donald Trump became president, the link between pedophilia and Satanism, and the link between John Benet Ramsey's death and satanic ritual killing?
Another question. Okay.
I just wanted to say that in terms of WikiLeaks, it sounded like that was actually a topic of interest to the DA in particular. He happened to have no views on it. So I'd suggest that maybe you want to open it up to other topics, questions.
Yes, we have at least one person here, Peg, who has other interests other than open records.
Oh, of course.
I've got one.
Okay, so it'll be Bill, because he does everything for us, then Peg, then this gentleman.
Mine's
Bill.
right at the edge of open records. So financially, with the asset confiscation, there's been a lot of money that's come into Boulder County, I think mostly into the Boulder County sheriffs, and he's been a little bit reluctant to tell people how the flow of funds has gone. Do you get significant funds from asset forfeiture from the feds, where you haven't actually proven anybody guilty, but you get paid anyway because the feds did something?
From a federal investigation, typically.
Right. As I understand it, the feds, they ask for local assistance in investigations, and then the payoff for the local people for helping them is that even if they never get convicted of a crime, they can still get the money. And that we actually have some people in this meeting that have experienced that, where their money has gone, and was confiscated. And I'm wondering if you get that money
I
from
can
the
talk about
feds.
that. I can talk about that a little bit. Obviously, everything that I do has to do with state court, so I don't know anything about how exactly that goes forward in federal court with regard to asset forfeiture. But I can tell you that with regard to Colorado state investigations, if you want to, so for example, someone is selling methamphetamine and they have a large amount of methamphetamine and $10,000. The state can bring an action to seize that $10,000 as fruits of a crime. If that happens, one of the rights of the defendant is to stay that proceeding until after the criminal proceeding is over, to see whether it's actually going to be proven that they committed a crime or not. So it's not exactly the same situation where money necessarily is going to get taken, even in the absence of a conviction.
No, I understand
With regard
the Colorado
to-
laws are very nice about that, but
Right.
there's still significant funds coming through the federal process.
So with regard to the federal process, when something is federally forfeited, money does come down to the county. Does my office get any of that money? I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I know that some of that money has gone to fund things like the Boulder County Drug Task Force, other things of that nature, that some funding has gone, some federal money has gone from that for sure. Whether it comes to my office, I'm not sure off the top of my head.
I guess the reason I was asking is because somebody was trying to track some of this money down that came into the sheriff's office, and
It's,
he was reluctant to tell him, so you better file an Open Records Act if you want to get the answer.
Well, I can tell you that the answer with regard to the percentages and where it goes, that's in statute. The statutes describe very precisely what percentage of money that's forfeited under what circumstances go to what agency or what county. I don't know what those are off the top of my head. I can also tell you that the Colorado legislature just this session changed some things. And one of the things that they changed is that they said that anything under, and I'm talking off the top of my head, but I think anything under $50,000 that wants to be forfeited has to be forfeited through the state rather than the federal government.
Wow.
So that is a change that just took effect, or I don't know if it's taken effect yet, but it was just passed this year. So you might look at the recent legislation on that. That changed some
Oh,
stuff.
thank you.
Sure.
We have Peg and then this gentleman. Anybody else wishes to speak? Please raise your hand.
Thanks. I guess my question, I actually have two. One came up yesterday. After the election, Stan Garnett, thank you, Garnett, put in the newspaper that when they were researching the signatures that had not been accepted for the election, he gave a hypothetical case where they would not prosecute,
Okay.
It was a Thank you.
Common mistake.
Yes, where they would not go after the person who had done wrong, and that would be in the case where he said if a mother were to sign the ballot for her envelope, not the ballot, thank you, my interpreter here, thank you. If the mother were to sign the envelope of a ballot for her son, if he were off at college, that you guys would not go after that particular mother for voter fraud. And I guess my thought is one ballot per person, and what does the relationship have to do with that law, and why is it okay for a mother to vote and sign her son's ballot?
All of those kinds of charging decisions are going to be discretionary, and we would look at every one of those individually to decide what's right or what's not right. The question, I think, for us in a situation like that would be, is it fraud to the degree that someone's vote was taken from them? If the college kid in your hypothetical wanted to vote for person X, but wasn't able to get back to fill out the ballot, but said, hey, could you sign this and just fill it out for person X? And that happened. Then whether or not the state should expend resources to prosecute that situation, I think is hard to justify. If, however, someone goes into someone else's mailbox and steals their ballot and fills it out for the person they want, that might be a very different situation. But if ultimately all mom did was save kid a trip back home to sign the ballot, and I'm not even talking for Stan, I'll just talk for myself right now, would I think that was the right thing to do, to bring a criminal case against that person? I don't think so.
I would disagree, but that's not this discussion. I think you're talking about open records.
No, that's okay, and I'm happy to hear your disagreement. Let me ask you. Let me continue with the hypothetical.
Okay.
We're in criminal prosecution. We're jailing people. We're putting people on probation and trying to help them overcome the situations that they have in their life. We're doing different things with regard to different crimes. What goal of the criminal justice system do you think would bringing charges in a situation like that prove? Are we trying to, would you want that person in jail for filling out that ballot?
I think so.
Okay.
And I say that because the Attorney General, or not the Attorney General, but the local general attorney, what is that called? No, the county.
There's a county.
DA,
The
okay.
DA, that's
District attorney is elected
Yeah.
by the county voters
Sure.
in order to make sure that the laws are followed. Part of our laws are to make sure that our election is conducted fairly. And if he can be persuaded to allow votes that are not legal, I have a problem with that.
Well, and I guess I would point out a couple of things, and one is whether or not that vote counts is not what we would be talking about. Whether or not that vote is allowed is not the province of the district attorney. the province of the district
No, it
attorney.
is, because you guys are handed the stack of envelopes that have the signatures on there, and you get to decide whether those signatures, those ballots in those envelopes will count or not.
That would be the, I think, the Attorney General's office. The question for the district attorney's office is always, should someone be prosecuted? That's the question for our office. Whether or not it's going to be counted or not towards the result is someone else's purview. We're prosecution.
I would like to.
We
expand-
have,
Oh,
we're gonna go
Okay.
then, and then back to you, Mary.
In addition to my first three questions, the Colorado Open Records Act was opted out by the judicial branch in Colorado, contrary to statute. Dennis Montgomery took 600 million pages of email showing massive surveillance in violation of our right to privacy. Rocky Flats grand jury had difficulty with gag orders and wanting to speak out. There has been a citizens grand jury that looked at elected officials' duty to post a bond to support their oath. And the Trump administration has cited evidence that 5.7 million non-citizens voted.
And the question?
Each and every one of those are questions for you in light of open records discussion and also the fraudulent ballot. We had 34,000 fraudulent ballots in Boulder County in 2014.
I'm not aware of that. We do get referred any instances where there are allegations of fraudulent ballots. There are always a handful. We have investigators that look into that. We would do things like call the people whose vote is involved, try to ascertain for certain whether their signatures are the signatures that were on there, things of that nature. But it's not in the hundreds, let alone the thousands.
Well, we disagree on that, and I'd be happy to cite the evidence. Anyway, the other 8 of my questions.
With regard to citizens' grand juries, I've heard of those. I understand that there are people who form their own grand juries and indict. That's not a grand jury that's going to be recognized by law.
Okay.
Any of my other questions? Could I get answers?
You had 8, and so let's, if there is nobody else, I'm waiting for Mary, and then I'll come back to you if there's nobody else.
Well, I'm waiting for answers.
I think our guest is reluctant to give answers on those questions. I'm speaking for you, but, you know, it's your call as to how to proceed.
I'm happy to talk to you about whatever you like, and if you want to talk to me further at another time, that's fine. But I think there are some other people with questions, so let's address those for now. I don't know anything about it.
Okay, so we have Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
So what I heard you say is the DA's office prosecutes, but somebody else has already made the decision as to whether the envelope will be opened and the ballot extracted and counted. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the counting of votes happens very early on, and some are kicked aside, and maybe some, based on our investigation, someone might make a decision whether that individual vote, and we're talking about a handful of votes, whether they're going to count or not. I don't actually know, but our decision, strictly speaking, is whether there's fraud or whether there's some crime that's happened, and whether someone should be prosecuted.
Okay, so, speaking to your scenario,
Okay.
where the mother is helping the child who has received a mail ballot at the mother's residence,
Yep.
and the child is absent.
Yep.
There is no guarantee that the mother has marked the ballot as indicated by the child, so there could be fraud against the child. And there could be no communication with the child, and therefore then there's fraud against the rest of the voters, one of whom has a vote canceled because of this ballot that was fraudulently cast.
You're totally right. You're totally right. And so when those situations come into our office, those are the kinds of questions that our investigators answer. And so we would talk to both the child, both the parent, anybody else who was around who might have any information about that, to try to ascertain whether it's that kind of fraud or not. If it is a situation, and sometimes we'll be able to tell and sometimes we won't. If we could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there's a crime that's occurred and that she changed his vote from what he otherwise would have had, I think that's a different situation than the hypothetical that Stan was addressing. But if it is more of a ministerial, mom tried to help out by filling out the ballot, and should we jail her or not, that's an absolutely could come up and may involve criminal activity that would be prosecutable. It's hard to say in the abstract, but we would look at all of those things.
So out of those 800 envelopes that had non-matching signatures, were any of the people who signed prosecuted?
There weren't 800 in Boulder County.
That was.
Yeah, that was the.
Okay,
that
and
was
I'd have to
cited by-
I'd have to look at it. We haven't prosecuted anybody to date on any of those.
That's what we thought.
Yeah, and it's the questions that certainly anything that looks like it might be fraud is investigated, and we're going to answer those kinds of questions. But we haven't seen anything where someone's trying to steal someone else's vote or something like that. We just haven't seen it.
Anybody else before I jump in, or before Ken jumps in? Peg.
Another issue that came up yesterday was, I'm the chairman of Boulder County Republicans, and as such, we purchased the voter records from Boulder County. And we've noticed that many people are purchasing a clause or whatever that keeps their information private, which makes it really hard for us when we go to do the canvassing after an election to know how many voters there were and where they live, and making sure that everybody got their vote counted. We had our IT gentleman tried to find out how we could get that information, and we were told to issue a CORA request.
Okay.
And I'm wondering, how can we be expected by law to do our canvass work if we have to start months beforehand and CORA request each of the data points that we need to do that legal job?
Good question. Doesn't overlap with my office a lot, but here's what I can tell you. There's always going to be a balance that the laws are going to try to strike, because there are people who don't want their information public to anybody, and they have certain rights to keep certain things private, and the law, I think, at the same time tries to respect that while trying to give people access who need it. Whether or not they're hitting that balance exactly right every time, I don't know. But I do agree that sometimes it can be difficult to have the information that you want. But CORA in particular has a 3-day turnaround time. And I think the reason that they make that 72-hour limit, which puts a lot of pressure on us, is so that people can get the information as quickly as possible. Is it going to be hard to get information sometimes? Absolutely. But that's the way it works sometimes,
Thank
I'm
you.
afraid. Yeah, sure.
May I jump in?
We have Ken first.
Go ahead.
I apologize.
I can't see
apologize.
Ken.
The Colorado judiciary has opted out of CORA contrary to statute. Are you planning to do anything about that?
I'm not aware of the Colorado judiciary opting out of CORA. I'm not aware of it.
Go check it out. So
Okay.
if in fact they have opted out, how would you deal with that?
If the entirety of the Colorado judiciary did something that was illegal, it probably wouldn't be for the Boulder County District Attorney. It would probably be for either a federal authority or a state authority.
600 million pages released by Dennis Montgomery?
I really can't. I don't know anything about that.
That's sort of like WikiLeaks, only 1,000 times bigger.
Well, again, our position is, with regard to public documents in our office, our position has always been that, to the extent possible, we want to be transparent, with the exception of those areas that I've talked about, like.
I appreciate that. There are other public agencies, and they're not nearly as filled with integrity as Stan Garnett's office.
Appreciate that.
So there's a question about who goes after these people, since they tend to have everything all locked up.
And jurisdiction's always interesting because there are things that are clearly designated by state statute to be the district attorney's office. For example, if someone burglarizes a house, that's obviously going to be the district attorney's office. That's a state law that they've violated. But people can do things that violate a number of different kinds of laws. If someone robs a bank, it might be federal or it might be state, because both have laws that are going to prohibit that. In the case of a governmental authority, oftentimes it's going to be the next level of governmental authority that's going to have supervision.
Mary,
Going back to the confidential voter issue,
Okay?
I'm under the impression that only the address is considered confidential, residential address, street address, city and zip code. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry. I don't know what's considered confidential under the law on that.
Okay, well, this isn't core, this is a separate
Sure.
statute.
Sure. No, I spend most of my time with the criminal side of the statutes, but I'm not sure what exactly can be kept confidential with regard to voter rolls. I'm sorry.
for our viewers on YouTube, a little background. CORA stands for Colorado Open Records Act, and any person in Colorado can ask a officer or a minister for records that they possess. And part of the problem is that the law keeps changing as to who gets to pay for this. And the ministers hate it, so they have requested the legislature allow the ministers to charge reasonable fees for these for this research. So my question to Mr. Finn is, if a Colorado Open Records request is issued to Stan Garnett's office, will he charge the citizen for research time?
Maybe is the answer. Most of the time the answer is no. There's a statutory copying fee that we assess that is 25 cents a page. So anything that you get is 25 cents a page. If we can put it all on a disc and give it to you, I think it's $15, if I'm not mistaken, per disc. If, however, a request comes in that asks for every instance of the word purple in any files in our office, we can do that. And but it's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take going through page by page looking for a word. If there's a situation like that that's going to take somebody out of circulation just to do that, then that's a situation where we might have to charge for that person's time.
Anybody else before I, yes, Scott.
Somewhat related to grand juries. I've been watching the TV show Bull over the last year or so.
Which one?
Bull.
Bull? Okay.
About a guy who tries to manipulate juries.
Okay.
And interestingly, just yesterday, I received a summons to jury duty.
All right.
And I have never served on a jury before. At times I've got ways to get out of it. But it doesn't look like that now. And I'm wondering, my question is, what's new? What do you see as issues or problems related to jury duty in Boulder County?
Issues or problems with relation to jury duty in Boulder County. I'll tell you what. Before I came to the Boulder District Attorney's Office, I worked in the Adams County District Attorney's Office for about 6 years. And I've tried cases also in Jefferson County, in Denver, in a lot of different jurisdictions. And I find Boulder County juries to be extremely thoughtful and willing to serve. We do not get that many people who come in who are dying to get out. Most people come in and say, it's my duty to serve, and some people will say it's inconvenient, but a startling number of people say it's my duty as a citizen and I'm happy to do it.
Well, it indicated that today you're more or less committed to that day that you're summoned. And
Yeah.
if you're selected, then the average jury duty is 3 days, and there are provisions for supposedly being paid for that or whatever.
Right.
And as being mostly retired now, I can't really argue
Right.
with that. I was just wondering what was new or what you saw as issues or problems.
Well, some people do come in and try to get off of jury duty. There's no question about
Yeah.
that. And for the most part, they're people, if that's how you feel about jury duty, we don't really want you there anyway. Because at the end of the day, what we really want is a jury who's going to find the truth as to the facts of a criminal case. And it
Are
can...
they the only criminal cases?
The ones that I do are only criminal cases, but you could be on a criminal or a civil case. So Colorado has a one-day, one-trial system. So if you get a jury summons, you're on the hook for either one day or one trial.
That's what they
Yeah. So, but for the most part, I've found I really like the process of jury selection, of just getting up in front of a huge group of people and talking to them about whether they can be fair in this case. And the issues that might come up. I find that really rewarding. I like talking to the people from Boulder and figuring that out. But most people take it very seriously.
We have the gentleman behind you, and then we have Heidi.
Okay.
On the topic of jury nullification, how would you handle it if somebody went in and shared information with fellow jurors that they are entitled to judge the law as well as the facts? They may find a mercy verdict if in the indication of their conscience it is warranted.
So jury nullification is a situation that comes up where people say they're not going to follow the law or they can't follow the law. The law in Colorado is essentially if you cannot follow the law, you cannot serve on that case. And people do occasionally say that. They occasionally say that they cannot or will not follow a particular law. We appreciate that. We always want people to be honest about it. But we need people who are going to... Juries don't deal with punishment. Juries don't deal with anything outside of the what happened. And we need people to be honest about the what happened so that we can move forward in some kind of a reasonable way. Yes, sir.
We
I'm
have
sorry.
Heidi and then Nick.
What are some of the more outrageous excuses you've heard from people trying to weasel out of jury duty?
I've heard a lot, and they and sometimes they're kind of silly, and sometimes they're not. So every now and then you'll have someone come in and tell you that they're a racist, and that they can't be fair in this case because they're a racist. And
Do you think they're telling the truth?
sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. But I don't care because I don't want that person on the jury. So things like that come up. People often talk about their personal obligations. People who own their own businesses,
Oh,
and that's not weaseling out, in
Yeah.
my opinion. That's totally reasonable, but it doesn't get you out. And I always find that kind of unfortunate. But there are very specific ways. Our government doesn't require that much of you. It requires absolutely that you serve on jury and essentially that you pay taxes, and that's kind of about it. And so it's hard to get out.
Well,
Nick.
Do juries in Colorado ever get the requirement or request from the judge to guide in sentencing? You said they don't decide the law or decide punishment or anything, but are they ever asked to? They are in other places.
Only with regard to death penalty cases do juries ever get asked to weigh in on sentence. However, a jury may be asked, for example, did this offense involve the use of a deadly weapon? And they will say yes it did or no it didn't. That will impact the sentence. But they do not say, well, I think this number of years is appropriate or something like that. We never ask them stuff like that. But they will decide in a death penalty case whether death is appropriate. Boulder hasn't had a death penalty case in many, many decades. But that is the only situation where that happened.
Okay.
We have 5 minutes before Mr. Finn has to run to court. Are there any other questions, comments? Then I will make my comment. Peg and Mary, who were talking about voting, are part of a loose group of people who are very concerned about voting integrity, of which I am also a member. By the way, for those on the video, I'm Ralph Schnoble. I'm the chair of the Libertarian Party, Boulder County, as well as the organizer of this lunch. And we have seen firsthand irregularities in the clerk's office. And because the county clerk has, I assume, authority equal to that of the district attorney, there's this sort of tension between the two ministers, the district attorney and the clerk's office, and a reluctance we have seen, or we perceive, on the part of the district attorney's office to go after the county clerk. So I would like to get your perception of this, or your comments on this political tug-of-war between these two ministers, if there is any. I know I'm putting you in an awkward position.
That's okay.
You can say, you know what, I have to go to I have to go to court now.
Here's what I'll tell you. I don't know, and I don't think anything about that particular issue, but I can tell you this. I have the honor of working for someone who I think is a really honorable man, and I think that Stan Garnett is simply not the kind of guy who's going to see criminal activity and just say, forget about it. I know my office and I know my boss, and if there is a case to be prosecuted, he's going to prosecute it. We have not shied away from corruption cases. We have not shied away from prosecuting, for example, police officers. We've prosecuted, I think, literally dozens of police officers since I've been in the office. It's not that.
Have you prosecuted, has this DA or any other DA in the state prosecuted any other elected official?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
We've got 3 minutes left, and if you wish to do a summary, or just want 3 minutes worth of applause. Pardon?
Cindy Domenico.
Sit-
Terms.
Yeah, well,
We have a constitutional provision having term limits, and one of our county commissioners has now been sworn in 4 times versus the constitutional maximum of 2. Do you plan to do anything about that violation, that corruption of a public office in Boulder County?
That would be classically a question that would not be for the district attorney. That's a situation where someone might well have jurisdiction to bring a lawsuit of some kind. I don't know. I don't know what
you're
the
looking at
issues
the
are.
person who brought the lawsuit.
Okay, there you go. Well, good for you.
And
You know,
for our viewers, the statute reads, I have to bring a suit within 3 days of the local judge doing whatever his finding is, and I brought it, what I thought was a legislated 42 days, and it went to the Colorado Court of Appeals, and they said, you know what, you were too late, and we're not ruling on the merits of the case.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
what this gentleman behind you is asking is, what I would ask is, why is it that a private party, me, out of my own pocket, has to pay for this kind of
State constitution.
enforcing the state constitution? And you have 30 seconds
I'm
left to
happy to
answer
do
that
it.
question.
I'm happy to do it. Well, different areas of enforcement are left to different mechanisms, and maybe there should be a governmental agency that's in charge of bringing that suit. I don't know, but our limitation is essentially, and there are some exceptions, but for the most part, we're going to be enforcing the criminal laws of the state of Colorado. That's what our office does. So, good for you for making your voice heard and for doing what you thought was right. Right or wrong, you did what you thought was right, and that's great. But if there's not a criminal violation, there's no statute out there that would carry criminal penalties that the district attorney's office would be involved in that situation. Whether or not it's right that there's nobody else who should do that, I leave to you.
It is my pleasure to ask, and my request to ask for a big round of applause for Sean, who has stepped into the lion's den. And we really appreciate you coming and hope that you come again.
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate the hospitality and the invitation.
And with that, I will terminate this recording. And we can talk freely, and if you are carrying a concealed weapon, you can aim it at me.